Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The latest annual report from the CIGIE documents over $70 billion in monetary accomplishments from IG investigations in 2024. Despite the Trump administration's disruption of the IG community, my next guest assures us that these kinds of investigations continue. Joining me in studio is the Executive Director of the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, Andrew Canarsa. The annual report opens with some staggering numbers, Andrew. It says, from across the federal IG community, monetary accomplishments of over $70 billion. Refresh our memory. What are those, and how does the federal government actually get its money back?
Sure, Terry. Thanks, first of all, for having me, and thanks for the question. Yes, very impressive accomplishments from across the federal inspector general community in fiscal year 2024. As you said, in the audit side and the investigative side. On the audit side, those returns are realized and they're seen when these big agencies, when they implement inspector general recommendations that are in all those audit reports, they're assigned a monetary value if the agencies followed through and made those changes. So that's when the real impact of IG work on the audit side is seen. In companion to that, on the investigative side, when OIG fraud cases have been prosecuted, gone through the judicial process, and there's been a sentencing, the perpetrators or the defendants in several cases it can lead to recoveries. So those defendants may owe money back to the government, or actual money has been recovered in the investigative process, or there could be fines or settlements leading to returns to the government.
So that $53 billion in audit savings, that's from agencies actually putting their recommendations into practice, not just the recommendations themselves.
It's the latter. It's the recommendations on paper saying if the agency did X, it could lead to a return of Y.
Okay. And then the actual recoveries is, again, the notional amount that could be recovered. Sometimes those perpetrators can't actually pay up, right?
Right. So it's a mix. On the investigative side, you will see some of that money has been returned or collected, and it may have been restitution was ordered against the defendant. To your point, sometimes those can be large amounts. It can take the defendant a long time to pay those back.
Got it. So where do most of these monetary recoveries come from? Are there certain investigations or audits that are more likely to generate these?
It's a great question. So it's really going to be those big numbers are going to be associated with audits of significant government programs or operations. So you think about things like unemployment insurance, the Social Security Administration's Supplemental Security Income Program. These are big-time, multiple billion-dollar a year programs. They are then susceptible to some level of fraud, or they're such big programs that they need additional internal controls or policy changes that could improve payment accuracy overall. Because when you're dealing with a big program, there could be big improvements to make.
But IGs do all kinds of investigations, sometimes little ones, sometimes whistleblowers, sometimes organizational effectiveness. Is there an incentive to pursue these big headline investigations over some of those smaller ones?
I would say yes, because I think, you're not going to catch it all, but what you're doing with those investigations is hopefully as they've gone through the judicial process and there's been a prosecution, it's a deterrent effect, for other potential, fraudsters. And it shows the public that there is a safeguard. There are people that are looking out for these programs and defending them.
That makes a lot of sense. And also, as a data geek, there was something in the report that I found really interesting. In the CIGIE strategic plan, they've got a goal about being a focal point for collaboration, best practices, and outreach. And one of the accomplishments is a toolkit for identifying and reporting monetary impact. So tell me a little bit about that. I'm imagining it's to make sure everybody reports these numbers kind of in the same way.
Exactly. You nailed it. So this was a product to give you a little background on the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency structure. The Inspectors General themselves are members of CIGIE, and they and their staffs contribute to the CIGIE committee structure. So we have an audit committee, an investigations committee, et cetera, the major disciplines that OIG personnel operate in. So as mentioned, we have an audit committee and an inspection and evaluation committee, and they worked together to build this toolkit to do exactly that. How do you demonstrate the monetary impact of these audits, inspections, evaluations? How do you really show the potential value of a recommendation? Because we thought if there's consistency across these reports in how that impact is being computed, people like you, other data geeks like you out there, they can say, okay, I can understand the rationale. I can understand the process and how they got to these dollar values.
And it helps to build trust in the reports. I'm speaking with Andrew Canarsa. He's the executive director of the CIGIE. So let's follow that thread that you mentioned a minute ago about how the CIGIE is structured. One of President Trump's first actions was to fire 17 of the agency IGs. What impact is that having on CIGIE's operations?
Sure. Yes, that was in the January time period, shortly after the change to the new administration. It's something that the IG community is dealing with. Obviously, there were then a number of vacancies at the IG level for some of our bigger OIGs. With those removals, we lost some of the kind of the more experienced, a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of leadership there. But I'm very encouraged to see the leaders that have stepped up in those vacancies. So those OIGs, they're continuing that great oversight that we mentioned, that were highlighted in 2024. They're continuing that work in 2025. As it relates to CIGIE, a big part of my job and the CIGIE leadership's job has been to support that new leadership, not only with continuing the oversight, but there's just been a lot, different executive orders, different OPM guidance. There's been a lot on them operationally as well to manage their organizations. So it's really been just a team effort, relying on each other, helping everyone to make sure that important oversight work continues.
That's good to hear, because oftentimes when people are in an acting capacity, they're not as bold as they might be if they had the position as a full-time gig, right?
That's right. And but I guess the situation kind of compels, still making those decisions. Because like we said, the audits, the investigations, inspections, evaluations, that work needs to continue. And then a lot of these operational decisions responding to these executive orders and OPM directives, that has to happen.
Is all of the turmoil in the IG community and the Trump administration's priorities, is that changing what CIGIE is going to focus on in the future?
Our focus has always been on CIGIE's two statutory mandates, which is to deliver top-tier training to investigators, auditors, all disciplines across the OIG community. So that hasn't changed. And then part two of that statutory mandate, you touched on it earlier, was to really serve as that focal point for collaboration. So if anything, we're doubling down on those mandates because the community needs it right now.
So you're not seeing any impact in funding that's going to result in a reduction to training or collaboration activities?
Not currently. And I think, CIGIE is still well positioned to support the OIGs, going forward.
Well, speaking of what CIGIE is positioned to support, the very definition of the organization is to generate savings and efficiencies and promote program integrity and reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. So I would assume that you would be perfectly positioned to help the DOJ meet their objectives. Has DOJ been engaged with CIGIE?
Not CIGIE directly, but anecdotally, we have heard that DOJ officials have interacted with a few IGs directly. Generally, those have been productive conversations, discussions, because again, there's kind of a shared mission there of improved government efficiency. I know DOJ as well has even highlighted some of those significant audit recommendations that we talked about. There was one specifically from Department of Labor OIG related to pandemic unemployment insurance. So DOJ really has the spotlight now, and I think they're kind of helping increase awareness of the work OIGs do to improve government efficiency. So I foresee there could be, future engagements going forward.
Well, that's good to hear. And certainly one of the big parts of CIGIE that's generated a lot of anti-fraud activity is the PRAC, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. That still exists. How are they doing, and what do you expect for the future for PRAC?
So, yeah, PRAC has just been, since the pandemic, it's been up and running for nearly 5 years now. Tremendous success in the area of identifying potential fraud in the pandemic programs, bringing different federal law enforcement groups together to pursue fraud across those programs has really demonstrated the power of data analytics and data matching to even get ahead of fraud in some cases. So just a ton of successes on that front. The PRAC is, as we talk today, scheduled to sunset on September 30th, 2025, as was stipulated in the CARES Act back in 2020. So we're hopeful that the PRAC may be extended so it can continue doing this great work. There is legislation out right now that would extend the life of the PRAC to the end of 2026, but it's just one of these, wait and see on where Congress goes with that.
Well, you mentioned their analytics capability. The PACE tool that they created really is sort of a paradigm for how DOJ is imagining connecting databases, right? So that they could see across, really do that proactive fraud prevention. Will the PACE continue?
You said it perfectly, explaining the PACE. But yeah, that would be that's kind of the push for, with the PRAC extending for a year and a half, we'd get to leverage those capabilities as well for another year and a half, and then kind of plan for the future. Like, what's the future of the PACE? Would it transition elsewhere? So a lot to unfold in the coming months.
Well, I know how important they've been, and I'm definitely keeping my data geek analytics fingers crossed.
Wonderful.
But let's kind of think ahead, because this is a really interesting report. How can the new agency leaders that are out there in this administration, how can they make the best use of CIGIE's products to improve their own operations and really be responsive to this president's agenda?
Sure. Great question. We mentioned it at the top, but these OIG audit reports are just packed with recommendations that can improve government programs and operations. A lot of them really, focused on government efficiency. There are, ready for this number, there are over 14,000 unimplemented OIG recommendations on the books right now. So there's a lot for agency leadership to dig into. Understandably, these big agencies, they have their priorities. They have their day-to-day business that they have to attend to. So they kind of have to make a resource decision of, do we invest time and resources to make these changes that can have big returns, down the road? So there's a lot on the books for them to consider. And as we mentioned, DOJ has highlighted some of the bigger ones out there. But that's really where the OIGs deliver value to improve these programs. And then that leads to benefits to the American public.
Well, Andrew Canarsa, Executive Director of the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, the CIGIE. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.
We'll post this interview and link to the CIGIE annual report on federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, Congress tries to figure out how to do less with less. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.